All right, the time has come. We're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining today's Research Radar webinar, Supporting Vibrant Communities Through Art and Livability, hosted by the Minnesota Department of Transportation and the Minnesota Local Road Research Board. My name is Michaela Kranz, and I will be your host today. We're excited to have our presenters Jessica O and Izzy Goldfarb joining us. Today's webinar is the fourth in our new Research Radar series, sponsored by the MnDOT Office of Research and Innovation and the Local Road Research Board. Each month, we will be highlighting a variety of research projects focused on a common theme. So last month, we looked at some sustainable transportation projects, and we'll share the link to that recording if you weren't able to make it. MnDOT's Office of Research and Innovation manages more than 185 research projects in progress, ranging from local initiatives to pooled fund projects with other states, comprising both basic and applied research. We're here to help transportation practitioners determine whether they need new research or if existing studies may solve your needs. Recommend the best research methodology for your project, access local and national funding sources, and manage your project from start to finish. The Local Road Research Board is a city and county-run organization that sponsors research and educational initiatives that address local transportation needs. You can stay up to date with our research by following us online and subscribing to our newsletters. We'll send you a link to both our website and subscription links in a follow-up email after the event. So you might have heard this announcement already, but we're going to share it again. We are happy to share the funding of 27 new academic research projects selected from a competitive pool of 82 proposals. To see the full list of new projects, you can scan the QR code on the screen. And if you have subject matter expertise on any of these projects and are interested in serving on a technical advisory panel, please reach out to our office. TAPs are currently being formed, and those projects are going to get started this summer. If you have an idea for a new project or have a problem that needs solving, we are currently accepting new research ideas on Idea Scale. So you can scan the QR code on the screen or follow the link after the webinar to submit your idea by April 1st of this year to get into this year's cycle. So before we get started with our presentations, I'm going to read the Tennyson warning. This session will be recorded for those who can't attend. If you have your camera turned on, the recording may include your image, which is private data under the Government Data Practices Act. You're not mandated for MnDOT to be able to use your image, and there are no consequences for declining to do so. To opt out of the recording, simply turn off your camera. I would now like to introduce our fantastic presenters. So Jessica O is MnDOT's Strategic Partnership Director in the Office of Sustainability and Public Health. In her role, she facilitates public and private partnerships, pilots new initiatives supporting healthy, equitable, and thriving communities, clean energy, and greenhouse gas emission reduction projects. Next up, Izzy Goldfarb is a planner in the Performance Risk and Investment Analysis Unit in the Office of Transportation System Management. Before this role, Izzy was a management analyst for the Metro District's Livability Initiative. So after both presentations, we will have time for questions. So please enter those in the chat box throughout the presentations, and we will get to them at the end. I would now like to hand it over to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Michaela. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to chat with you on this beautiful, beautiful Monday. As Michaela said, my name is Jessica O. I think I'm going to actually change my title to Ambassador of Hope and Joy and Love and all things good. I think we need hope and joy in this moment of change within our country, and so much opportunity to make our investments catalytic to communities. So I'm excited today to just chat with you a little bit about the critical work that we've done on this research project, what we learned from it, and some next steps with some of my sister colleagues in different offices. So thank you so much for having us today. What you see here on the screen is a picture from the Hines. It's a North Loop Green public space pilot project, which was a project that we worked on over the course of about 4 years that allowed for this large scale kind of underbridge enhancement project that's right near Ramp C, right across from Twins Field in downtown Minneapolis, that is serving an important community connection purpose and an important economic development purpose. But maybe we'll touch upon that project at some other point, but I'm always happy to share that journey with others. So as Michaela mentioned, I'm from the Office of Sustainability and Public Health here at Central Office at the mothership, and we have 7 priority office functions of how we are serving the transportation system for MnDOT. We are focused on increasing the resilience of the transportation system, reducing carbon emissions, embedding public health and human impacts within our work, advancing complete streets policy, and expanding alternative uses of rights of way that really support our planning vision and a vision of quality of life and economic development and livability and public health and clean energy and emission reduction. So we have many areas that we work within this work, but I'm excited today to share a little bit about alternative uses of rights of way. And just as many of us, don't own these topics, many folks work in these areas across our agencies that have important intersections with arts and culture and creative placemaking. And so we have key partners that we work with in Metro's district in the Center for Community Connections, in the Office of Land Management's Property Management and Highway Sponsorship Program. But when we say alternative uses of rights of way, these are uses, our right of way is really our second most critical resource as an agency. Our first is our people, our second is the land that we own. And MnDOT is under more demands than we ever have been for how those lands help support meeting community community goals. And we have an opportunity to figure out what makes sense to allow new uses on our land while also still safely operating the transportation system. So when we think about this, we are part of a national conversation that's happening with AASHTO, with a new task force that is really trying to understand these uses, get a hold on them, and figure out how can they really benefit communities and how can they benefit the transportation system. So as we think about those, we're thinking about those uses that fit within buckets of social uses, environmental uses, economic development uses, and sustainability uses. So these are really important to communities, and if we can manage to allow some of these elements and help meet other critical goals for communities while still operating the transportation system, it can be a huge benefit to communities, which is kind of how we got to this research project. So our researchers that we worked with on this project were from Urbane Consulting and from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and they're geographers and placemaking professionals. So you're welcome to link to the actual research project, but the researchers, I'm trying to kind of represent a little bit of the research they helped us engage in today. So we had a group of about 5 or 6 folks that for the last 6 or 7 years have been, kind of rabble rousing and brainstorming around some of these topics. There have been really interesting also national conversations about the intersection of arts and culture and transportation. And some of our leadership has engaged in some of that with leaders with Smart Growth America, with the National Endowment for the Arts, with many other folks that are asking, how can we leverage these practices to improve the outcomes of transportation projects? And so we came up with a list of some research questions we wanted to dive into. So what we really wanted to understand is how do some of these arts and culture strategies, how can they be used to mitigate the negative impacts of transportation projects within communities? What are some examples that can really help us understand creative approaches, and what is to be gained from working with artists and really in more of a process way, and really how can we embed creative thinkers and artists within different processes, what could be gained from that, and how can this really support how we work with communities, especially underserved communities, to support economic vitality. So we dug into these folks and had a pretty interesting technical advisory panel. So I want to thank anybody who's joining us today who joined this 2-year effort, but we really were intentional around activating external partners. Sometimes our TAPs are very internal focused, and we really went out of our way to represent and engage those that would bring different perspectives, both national voices and, even more importantly, local voices to the table, who had expertise in arts and culture, and who really help us understand what the pressures are of our partners, but also what are some opportunities. So we were pleased to have a very huge cross section of different types of professionals and arts leaders who joined the effort. We thought it was really pretty critical to start with an analysis of kind of our current state of practice. So there are many different ways that arts, culture, and creative placemaking could be expressed in different ways through the work of MnDOT. And so we wanted to get everybody on the same page of where are we starting from and what is our current state. So we invited folks from intersecting policy and programmatic areas in order to provide their perspective to the group and share a little bit about how they operate currently and what their vision is. And so those areas that we dug into were around public engagement, were around visual quality, were around our formal out on the highway policy, were our cost participation policy, what we pay for, what we don't pay for, NEPA and mitigation, how do we develop projects, what is our transportation equity vision, what is our context sensitive solution vision, and complete streets policy. So we saw all of these critical policies as intersecting with this work and needing to really understand for our researchers and for the TAP, where are we starting from? So before though we get into some funky definitions and start to talk about really how what we where we landed and some of the key areas, I wanted to just take a quick minute and have do a kind of a baseline of where are we today, or what do you think creative placemaking is? So if we could have in the chat, I would love for folks to kind of take a little bit of a vote of what is creative placemaking. Is creative placemaking a mural on a bridge pylon? Is it B, improv theater at a transportation planning event? C, chalk art at the site of a new BRT stop? D, mosaic tile art on a main street? Or E, a poster for a hypothetical streetcar line? Or is it F, all of the above? So if you could in the chat indulge me for just 1 second, I would love to see if you could vote which of these are creative placemaking. Maybe Michaela, you can help me see when folks have taken just a minute and had a little bit of a vote there of which one of these are creative placemaking.
Okay, the overwhelming response has been F, all of the above.
Oh, y'all are just
Oh,
too.
and we have one answer as G, all of the above and more.
And more. Oh, I
Shout out
like
to
that.
Mike.
And I love
Hmm.
that. I'm a more is more kind of a person. Yes, I love that. You're exactly right. G and more. You're exactly right. Creative placemaking is all of these things. So it can be both part of process and what we consider arts outcomes, but it's about the deep integration of arts and culture within practice and within engagement and many other areas. So all of these are technically creative placemaking. So thank you for indulging that. So the scope of the actual research project, there's quite a bit of extensive history in the transit world of um, of art and of station enhancement and public art practice, and less so within highway and more road-based, high-speed environments. And so we asked our researchers to help really think of some of these elements that were more about less about transit, more about the other roads that are utilized by transportation agencies. We were looking for examples and case studies that cut across many different types of contexts, both urban, suburban, and rural. We wanted examples that were not just Minnesota focused, that were also across the US for us to learn from them. And we really started from a place of a broad definition of creative placemaking. And so we're talking about creative placemaking as a way to strategically shape communities, their character, their physicalities, including arts and culture tactics with partners. And so we weren't not just interested in public art. So if you're here to say this is about public art and artists, we explicitly are thinking of creative placemaking much more broadly, that this we're, public art may or may not be included within the scope of these projects that were studied. And so we really like the way that the National Endowment for the Arts describes what is to be gained from arts and culture strategies. And so they describe the opportunity for arts, culture, and design to help strengthen communities by, elevating community assets and voices, injecting new energy, resources, different types of people to support the work. We have had a really interesting conversation in the last week as well with a very interesting program that's for artists in government that is helping folks envision different possibilities. And artists bring a particularly unique skill set for imagining new and different possibilities. And I think that that is where artists in process can be really, really powerful and really innovative. But also arts and artists and all these elements can really help connect communities, can tie these pieces together with new relationships, and while also really elevating and honoring the lived experience of those that are participating. So we think that there's a lot to be gained from these tactics in the work from different angles. So the case studies that we don't want to go into these in super great detail. I'm going to kind of hit on the high points and then share with you a little bit of our next steps and some of the learnings. But we had case studies from all over the U.S. that covered lots of different elements, as well as some artists in residence programs that were really around that more process-based piece of embedding artists in how we do the work, and wanted to get kind of an interesting cross section. One of the coolest projects, and maybe even one of the most well-known national projects that was also documented with a state level DOT, is Chicano Park in San Diego. So this is a kind of an interesting example, but is reflective of many communities where an interstate highway in the 60s, divided communities, separated communities. Some resources were promised and were not delivered upon. And so community advocates came together to sort of force the hand of the local DOT in honoring some of the mitigation that was promised. And that included some public gathering spaces for the community. And so as part of that, there was an agreement for a pretty significant mural project under I-5 in San Diego. And this project has become an absolute important resource and support source of connection and empowerment and gathering space for the community since then. It was established as a National Historic Register site in 2016, and was even given federal resources to do some restoration activities in terms of the telling of the stories through the murals and its importance for the community. So it really reflects a challenging history, but an opportunity to take existing infrastructure and have it support improved community outcomes and fulfill some of the community's wishes. So there were many interesting findings from all of the different case studies, but just in the interest of brevity, the case studies, our researchers found that most DOTs have almost no policy and no structure about how to institutionalize arts and culture within projects, even public art within projects. So what they found was that when these things do occur, they're often champion based. It's not part of how a DOT does the work. There are very few formal evaluations of like what really happened there. So these projects tended to be very partner driven, funding driven, context driven, and ad hoc, not institutionalized, which is, I think, what we would expect to see. And there's a lot to be gained from it really being institutionalized, not just a one off. So the researchers, if they were here today, would share that their recommendations are that as we think about these tactics and these opportunities and these tools, that engaging arts and culture and artists should be in the very beginning of a project, not at the end, and that we need to break the mold of thinking about arts and culture as just a public art outcome and a public art focus. That in reality, when we engage artists and culture bearers in communities, they can participate at many different aspects of a project, help build more positive interactions with communities, help elevate the voices and celebrate the character and the sense of place of communities, and foster healing and restorative practices throughout all of it. And so they found many different opportunities for this, and there's quite a bit of detailed recommendations in the actual report. But fundamentally, it's about the front end of the process, not the end, where a public art outcome could be included. So they were concerned about the fact that, it's quite hard to partner with MnDOT. It's a challenging bureaucracy to navigate, and that because we outsource so much of our community engagement to consulting firms, that this is both an opportunity and a challenge. That if we want to sustain relationships with arts agencies and cultural agencies, there's just different things within the model of how we do the work that we need to consider. So those were some of the nuance that they shared with us. But in kind of closing, what came out of this project was the opportunity for MnDOT to integrate some of these practices going forward. And so there are kind of some actions that are in process that we invite you all to consider joining and to follow along with as we think about different strategies from different angles of our agency. And so we're in the process of evaluating doing kind of a peer exchange or a webinar series to advance these topics internally, and we're activating a community of practice in order to kind of unite and to be able to have some accountability for how are we systematically trying to embed these opportunities within the work of MnDOT. And so we see that there are tendrils of this within our cost participation policy update, within the great work that's been happening in Metro around creating art and placemaking guides within visual quality processes, within updating our art on the highway policy of how we allow public art on our infrastructure, how we map the projects that are already there, how we guide partners and making it easier to partner with us, how we understand deeply that communities, especially underserved communities, there's always more of a request for art and for green infrastructure than often we have the ability to leverage. And so how do we support those goals whilst, as a convener and as a supporter, in different ways. And so we think that there are extensive opportunities there and ripe for innovation, whether that's graffiti or partnership with communities. We want to continue to build this out. So if you're interested in joining this effort, please reach out afterwards. And those of us that are rabble rousing in these space, we would love to connect with you. So as we think about this, some of the topics that came out of this research project for action, and I will wrap up because I do see that I'm over time, but those of you that know me know I am nothing if not verbose. But in general, we see that there are huge opportunities here for training and for building out our vision of this at MnDOT of what are some best practices for project managers that want to use these tools? How can we help document that and create a playbook? How can we help folks navigate the community said they want public art? What are opportunities for that? How can we elevate sense of place and our equity vision within our aesthetic choices? And what are ways to do that? How do we engage with artists through public engagement? What are ways to hire artists and arts organizations through our procurement tools? And some of my colleagues are also kind of digging into arts as construction mitigation to support those communities. And how do we effectively work with artists and arts agencies? So we think there's a lot to be gained from digging into these topics over time. So in closing, I just want to share with you a couple of additional resources of the research project, but also some definitions and some of MnDOT's policies and our experimentation with an artist in residence and some other cool things. So we're always happy to collaborate on these types of projects and hope that we can collaborate going forward on these strategies that are so important for how we can partner and build support for our projects. So thank you. Thank you for your time today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica, for that energizing presentation. I know I'm counting down the days for spring and summer programming to be starting at North Loop Green again. If you didn't make it there last year, you need to make it to North Loop Green this summer. And it sounds like there's a lot of exciting opportunities, not just for resulting in new community spaces, but also for new partnerships and adjusting the ways that we have our processes at MnDOT. So if you have questions for Jessica while they're fresh in your head after hearing her presentation on opportunities to get engaged at MnDOT, on the research she presented on, any of the case studies included, get those added in the chat box and we'll have time at the end of the session to ask some of those questions. So I'd now like to hand it over to Izzy, who is going to be presenting on measuring the livability framework.
Thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Awesome,
Perfect.
thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Izzy Goldfarb, a performance planner in the Office of Transportation System Management. About 9 months ago, I was part of the Livability team at the Metro District, and there I led a TRS, also known as a Transportation Research Synthesis, which is basically a quick turnaround, deep literature review to help us better understand the best practices for measuring how livable a place is. We were able to complete this TRS thanks to our collaborators on the project, Bolton and Mink, the Livability Initiative staff, a technical advisory panel, and our liaison from MnDOT's Office of Research and Innovation. First, I'll provide some background on the Livability Initiative. The story actually starts around 60 or so years ago when Interstate 94 was constructed and unfortunately tore through the Rondo community of St. Paul. Fast forward many decades, and it's time to address this piece of infrastructure and fix transportation problems on I-94 between Minneapolis and St. Paul. In 2015, there was a healing ceremony in the Rondo neighborhood during which former Commissioner Charlie Zell, along with other local officials, acknowledged and apologized for the destruction to communities as a result of the construction of I-94, and MnDOT made a commitment to do better. Then in 2016, the Rethinking I-94 project begins and a long-term process to engage communities who live, work, play, and commute along the corridor. And throughout the early phases of Rethinking I-94, the project team engaged with hundreds of stakeholders along the corridor and learned that they want more transparency and partnership from MnDOT, and that their issues with I-94 go beyond typical infrastructure needs. This feedback was the catalyst for the creation of the Livability Initiative. And in 2019, the Livability Initiative separated from the Rethinking I-94 environmental process and became a Metro district-wide initiative. And just last year in 2024, we wrapped up this research project on measuring livability. And for the future in 2025, they're working on more implementation of the Livability Initiative within the Metro district. So what exactly is livability? At the Metro District, we define it as using the quality, location, and type of transportation facilities and services available to help achieve broader community goals. And some of those goals include access to good jobs, affordable housing, schools, green spaces, and safe streets. And that's still a pretty nebulous definition. So to hone that definition a little bit more, MnDOT conducted livability workshops in 2021 to better understand what livability meant to communities. And they ended up with 7 pillars of a livable place, which are safety, trust, equity, connections, sense of place, health and environment, and economics. And their intent is that using this framework as a guide during program and project development will ensure that the human experience, the full range of it, and real world needs are addressed in new or improved transportation facilities or infrastructure. And they also hope that incorporating this livability framework reduces or eliminates harms that a project could cause communities. So the goal of this TRS was the first step in trying to even further define this framework. We need to translate this conceptual framework into a workable tool that makes it easier for planners to incorporate it into their work. We need to clarify when, where, and how the livability framework comes in. We need to help people understand the baseline of livability conditions in a neighborhood and to be able to track progress and to track what the effect of a project is. The Livability Initiative wants each of the pillars of the livability framework to be thoroughly considered and evaluated when people are making decisions about transportation programs or policies or projects. And so we're aiming to create something called a livability measurement tool that will use data to help planners really fine tune, understand how livable a community is, and prompt actions that can address those needs, any livability needs. So the first step to creating this livability measurement tool is to identify current best practices for measuring livability. So this report, as I said, is a deep literature analysis of existing research and identifies points of consensus, debate, and gaps in the research on how to measure livability. And we had a few supplemental questions too, including how does land use come into play? Can we use the same indicators of livability for a rural community and a highly urban community? Another supplemental question being, what are the most reliable and procurable sources of data? So by the end of the project, the team reviewed 62 articles and pulled out all of the definitions of livability that they found. They pulled out each measurable indicator of livability that was mentioned, and they also pulled out opinions and assertions on the application of livability measurement and pillars. So now I'm going to go pillar by pillar and discuss, excuse me, there we go, and discuss the primary measures that the researchers pulled out from all the 62 articles. So first pillar, health and environment. The Livability Initiative defines health and environment as a livable transportation system that bolsters the health and well-being of people who live, work, and play near system corridors. A livable transportation system requires investments that prioritize delivering benefits to Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, and low-income communities who disproportionately endure the most severe health-related transportation burdens. So out of all the articles, they pulled out 39 distinct indicators of health and environment. And the primary measures that they found, which means the measures that were mentioned the most frequently, were greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, noise pollution, tree canopy coverage, and surveys of health. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see areas for additional research. That column is indicators that were not found in the research, but brainstormed by the TAP members to think about, where we want researchers in this next phase of the project to look more deeply and consider if they would be part of a holistic measurement of each pillar. Those being specifically cancer, diabetes, poor mental health, childhood obesity, and level of traffic stress. Next, we have economics. A livable transportation system connects people to jobs, boosts local economies, and creates wealth building opportunities for communities, especially in under-resourced areas. They found 49 distinct indicators, and the primary measures being population growth and shifts, job density, workers and customers within a specified distance of study area, and commercial rent rates and vacancy rates. Now, the TAP came up with many areas for additional research for economic pillar, being job creation from infrastructure projects, poverty levels, business types and tenure, homeowner and renter balance, educational attainment, internet and computer access, and housing affordability over time. Next, we have sense of place. A livable transportation system supports each neighborhood's unique sense of place. A strong sense of place makes people feel at home in their community and connected to their neighbors and culture. And they found 72 indicators. The primary indicators have a theme: population density, intersection density, job density, and a mixed land use. So we have a lot of areas for additional research suggested by the TAP here too, as defining a sense of space with respect to culture, ethnicity, and history, measuring the feeling of belonging, the feeling of distinctness of an area, and the legacy and tenure of businesses, cultural hubs, residents, and neighborhoods. Next, we have safety. A livable transportation system ensures that everyone, regardless of their mode of transportation and who they are, can travel safely without risk to their well-being. They found 11 indicators. Primarily, they found that an audit or a survey of feelings of safety. Then they also recommended fatal or serious injury collisions by mode, violent crimes, exposure to large vehicles, and exposure to high speeds. As for areas for additional research, the TAB came up with a location-specific research, for example, tribal communities. Next, we have connectivity. A livable transportation system gives people safe, efficient, and affordable multimodal options to access places that they need to go. They found 83 indicators, primary measures being pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicle volumes and transit ridership, vehicle miles traveled, a walk score, and transit route and stop counts. As for areas for additional research, the tab came up with individual connections and wayfinding and degrees to which transportation connects people to where they want and need to be by multiple modes. So transportation options. Second to last, we have equity, transportation investments that ensure that the distribution of benefits and burdens of transportation systems and services are fair and just, which historically has not been fair. They found 28 indicators, being household poverty, cost burden households, housing cost burden households, household spending on transportation as well, populations under 18 and over 65, and diversity of neighborhoods by race and income. And areas for additional research, they found connections to measures of human health, disproportionate burdens experienced by Black, Indigenous, and people of color and low-income communities, and the cumulative impact of historical decisions on current equity considerations. Last but not least, trust. To create and maintain a livable transportation system, transportation authorities must maintain and build stakeholders' trust through long-term good faith relationships. They found 21 indicators, the primary measures being surveys of subjective well-being, voting rates, and infrastructure quality and condition. And as for what the TAP came up with for areas for additional research, they found measuring the impact of actions or harms on a community, measuring their trust in government and their trust in MnDOT specifically, and the impact of vehicle and pedestrian injuries and deaths on the community. Now moving on to the findings on the application of livability measurement tool. These are points that the researchers raised to consider in the next phase of building out this livability measurement tool. First, and pretty interestingly, we have to consider managing conflicts. While the livability framework is based on the premise of a harmonious collection of livability pillars, the research at times challenge that assumption. For example, improvements to sense of place could end up having negative impacts on equity in a situation where beautifying places drives up property values and makes an area less affordable to people of lower incomes. Another example of this would be improvements to connectivity in roadway networks would lead to more driving, more emissions, but negatively impacting the air quality. So there's no simple solution to these conflicts, but it's a good thing that these conflicts surface so that the decision-making process can prioritize a specific community's goals and look for common ground.
Want me to write on my thing? Write it on my calendar.
Second, we have to consider context categories or land uses. The applicability of the tool will vary by geography and character of a place. And while all livability pillars apply in all of these circumstances, in some places, one pillar might take more prominence than another. For example, a community in a natural or rural context might have lower density land use and fewer measurable data points, whereas urban high density area would have more data points. So also no simple answer, but that is definitely something that the next team of researchers will consider. Also, they're going to consider data availability, consistency, and cost. There are indicators that use standard public resources for data, which are typically free and reliable over time because they ask the question the same way. But then there are also some indicators that are qualitative and need surveys to be conducted, and those are often expensive and complicated, and sometimes it's hard to maintain consistent methods that would maybe tarnish the quality of the data over time. Next steps. So with this knowledge, the Office of Livability is going to coordinate with other MnDOT offices. They're going to procure a team to perform the supportive research that addresses the areas for additional research. They're going to identify and set a complete set of measurements for livability. They're going to determine threshold levels for livability needs within each neighborhood and potentially accommodating for those different context types, and developing a process to guide the application of this tool and conduct a rollout within Metro District. So thank you very much to the Office of Research and Innovation for making this first step in the development of the livability measurement tool possible. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing this tool come to life. And thanks to you all for attending today. That's all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Izzy, for diving into your transportation research synthesis. So many pillars, really rich with a lot of indicators that you guys dove into. And if for folks on the call, if you're not familiar with transportation research synthesis, it is another offering from the Research and Innovation Office. So maybe if you're not in need of a full-blown research study and you're looking for either a literature search or a survey of practice, that's something we can provide. So just reach out to chat with us if that's something you're looking for. So we have some time for questions. If things are coming to your mind, add them to the chat and we'll use this time with our presenters. So the first question from Kayla is, how can we keep up to date on these topics? And that came in after your presentation, Jessica. I know you guys have a fantastic webinar series on sustainability and public health topics. Are there other ways folks can stay engaged and up to date?
I think we need to build those out. I think that that's, I think one of the things we're struggling with a little bit at MnDOT too is to how to convey that information in a way that is efficient for folks who are trying to follow along at home with some of these topic areas. So I was just contemplating that we could literally fill your inbox with an entire newsletter just on resilience topics, or just on arts and culture topics, or just on public health intersections. So I think we're looking for suggestions here. What's an efficient way to keep folks up to date? I think it's a crowded landscape. So I would love to hear people's preferences and suggestions.
Absolutely. In a time of maybe borderline information overload, finding the right ways to reach people. So if you're on the call and you want to learn more about this topic, drop some of those preferences and ideas in the chat, if it's an email update or following along in some other ways. And I did put a link to the sustainability and public health webinars. I believe that's MnDOT only, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So any external friends on the call, so happy you're here. That link is not going to open for you. But for MnDOT folks, consider joining that. Okay, another question came in saying, I'm wondering if there are any studies about public art and traffic calming, especially in neighborhoods. So I think this one's for you again, Jessica. And I saw you already linked a helpful news article in the chat.
I think most of the research is either international or specific to pavement, painted asphalt, painted pavement projects, and painted bump outs and curb extensions, and some innovations in that area, of which it was a pretty big deal for the MUTCD, for those who like to geek out on paint and traffic devices and the rest. It was a very big deal for the feds to have an expanded vision for what might be allowable under the MUTCD and all the innovations that have occurred with painted asphalt. And there's a committee of folks who are evaluating our practices around that, our allowances, our safety, our considerations for individuals with low vision and individuals with disabilities. So I think that that's being heavily unpacked through a group that is thinking through some of those opportunities and implementation challenges and practices. So I do believe that the research does show that there is some light research on some of the Bloomberg invested projects that show some safety benefits from painted asphalt projects. But I think establishing, though, maybe it's a good reminder that perhaps we should share a bit more broadly around some of the research foundations for those elements with our partners. So as we think about communication, it feels like an opportunity. to synthesize those and share those for your use.
Thanks, Jessica. And also sharing in the chat, there is an active MnDOT project right now called pavement marking / colored pavement friction differential and product durability. So looking at colored pavement and how does that help with safety, and then also slipperiness. You guys know what I'm trying to say. Slipperiness and then visibility at night, that kind of stuff. And the technical liaison for that is Ethan Peterson with MnDOT. So if that's something you're interested in, you can subscribe. We'll email you updates as we get results for that project. Okay, another question is, can the livability framework be tailored to different areas? So rural versus urban as an example.
That's a good question. I think it can. I think that something that the researchers for the next stage are going to think about is how, if the tool can, if the planner can input, okay, I have a rural project, will that pop up with different indicators of livability? And if it was urban, will that pop up with different indicators? It's a really good question, and I'm excited to see what their answer is, but I'm not exactly sure at this moment.
Great question, Molly. A question from Amy, is landscaping ever considered an artistic design? So could landscaping be a part of art?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Amy. I think that our very talented landscape architects have, done some very innovative projects that I think are very, very creative. Whether or not they would be considered public art, I think would be some kind of questionable there. But maybe, do you mean, I do think that we have done some innovative things with landscaping that are, a bit of higher design and that are artistic in nature. Maybe that's what you mean, Amy. Or do you want to come off mute and ask your question a bit differently? Oh, cool. Okay. And I think that we have some very, very talented people in Carol Zoff's unit in the Office of Environmental Stewardship who care very deeply about the intersection of some of these elements and how we can get such rich co-benefits off of green infrastructure for livability and quality of life, but also stormwater capture and shade and reducing urban heat islands and capturing carbon. And, there's just so many co-benefits and economic development. I mean, the more green infrastructure we have, the better it is for economic development. So I think that so many of these strategies over time feel like rich for us to document how they are helping us achieve multiple goals at the same time.
Thank you, Jessica. And folks, we do have a couple more minutes, so we've got space for conversation and connection right now. If you've got questions, put them in the chat. I have a question for Izzy. So you shared that you found, I'm going to misrecall the number of indicators. It was like 72, right? And I'm wondering if any of those indicators were surprising to you and the rest of your technical advisory panel. If other folks on the call, if seeing those slides, you're like, oh, I never would have thought of voting rates as being an indicator or something like that. Were any of the indicators a surprise?
That's a great question. And they were, like you just said, let's go with voting as an indicator of trust in government. It makes sense, but it is really out of the box when you think about building out a tool for transportation planning. Voting rates. Voting rates are definitely not the first thing you think of. So what I learned through the research and how many different indicators there are for each pillar, there's just so much under the umbrella of each livability term, and yes, many surprises. I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but looking at the research, definitely.
And if there are surprises to anybody else attending, feel free to put them in the chat. We all have different perspectives and come with different, life stories to this work, and so different things are surprising to different people. Okay, we've got a question from Andrew. Do you think the presence of art would decrease instances of unwanted graffiti? If infrastructure is left unpainted, we probably spend some money removing or painting over graffiti. Maybe art could reduce that cost.
Well, I think there is some research around public art and graffiti. And so I think that in Metro, it's my understanding the Center for Community Connections and others are evaluating graffiti deterrence, public art graffiti deterrence pilots and some opportunities for innovation there. But I would defer to, it looks like Renee raised her hand and you guys might have more information around how Metro is evaluating that. But the general consensus is that graffiti artists will not destroy another artist's work and the service of their graffiti. So it often can be a way to defer unwanted graffiti. But Renee, it looks like you were raising your hand to respond.
Oh, no, I
Perhaps?
have a different question. I wasn't responding to that.
Oh, okay. Well, then you get to wait.
I'll wait.
Okay, no worries. But I know that I don't know if Lisa Austin's on the call today, but if you're interested in digging into those questions of graffiti and opportunities to deter graffiti, I think that Metro, it's my understanding that the Center for Community Connections is evaluating some options there because we think it is an area for some opportunities to pilot some solutions.
Lisa, not to put you on the spot, I do see you're on the call. If there's anything you'd like to share, you're welcome to unmute.
Oh, sure. I was just starting to type something in the chat because I want to make sure Renee had time to ask her questions. But yeah, there's absolutely information about how public art can reduce graffiti. Some of our local government partners have actually have put public art in places to reduce graffiti, and they've got data and statistics show how much less graffiti they have. So we know that our local government partners have examples of this kind of thing. And yeah, we're looking to try to figure out if we can do more of it too. So yeah, it's a great way to deter graffiti for sure. And if anyone wants to talk to me more, put a message in the chat and I'll give you my contact information. Or I'll even put it right here now. So thanks.
Thanks for opening that door, Lisa. Renee, are you ready
Yeah.
to ask your question?
Yeah, and it maybe isn't even a question, but more of a comment, in that some of the metrics that I saw you present, Izzy, on the livability, they did seem from the research, as we'd expect, very like technical in nature, some of them. So it's nice to see that you have that additional column there that the tech was able to provide some other like more qualitative things that might be a little outside of the scope of the typical, crashes, KSAs, things like that. Like when we think about safety or sense of place, the other things that kind of go into that. So I guess that would be my kind of takeaway from like the research, is that it seemed in many of them like very technical kind of measures and metrics. And then you're going to broaden on that for our kind of framework and measuring. So that's good to see. Thank you.
Yes, it was surprising to me as well. It was, like you said, highly technical, and I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to capture the more holistic ideas from that the TAP had within this research, even though it wasn't part of the deep literature review. But something that was interesting is that the top indicator of safety was a qualitative survey of feeling of safety, and that part really surprised me.
That I know I almost thought it was missing, and then I'm like, oh no, wait, that is there, because I was like ready to be all critical, but then I saw that and I was like, oh, that's nice.
Right.
Because I would assume that wouldn't have been there, but that's good that it was.
Right. Yes.
Okay, from the chat, Izzy did add one of the surprising measures identified as being proportion of the sky visible looking across the street, which that's surprising to me as well, but makes sense when you think about it.
That's a sense of place measure.
I love it. We've got a question from Val asking, do you have any specific examples of right-of-way projects that include landscaping and or art, and how to navigate that with transportation engineers?
I'm just gonna, this is Renee. Lisa, wasn't there the one on the riverside with the landscaping where they were trying to do the rocks? It was kind of a thing, but then it didn't really turn out as well. But that was kind of landscaping, trying to like make a design within the, I'm just thinking of that one.
Sorry, I was in my unmute. Well, I think there's lots of examples of creative things with landscaping. I'm not thinking of it off the top of my head, so I'd have to think about it a little bit more. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the question of navigating with transportation engineers, do you mean MnDOT's engineers around projects, or I guess, can you say more about how to navigate to include both of those elements within projects, or Val, can you expand your question a little bit? Okay, of city or MnDOT. I mean, I think there's lots of ways to build a case for these types of investments, and our Art of the Highway policy can be utilized to include art within projects. I think that the central piece of advice that I would give would be around, as we activate partnerships for these elements, that we're thinking through a long operations and maintenance life cycle of these different pieces, and that often MnDOT doesn't have the resources to maintain green infrastructure to the degree to which folks would like to see those investments made. And so sometimes our critical partnerships that we have, or those that are, underwriting art and then maintaining the art and donating the public art through the Art on the Highway policy, are really critical to those things occurring. And so strong champions on the local level have to make a big difference. But I'm sure there are lots of other pieces, but I'm sure Michaela has some wrap up stuff, but I'd encourage you to reach out to us offline. Myself, Lisa Austin, our Office of Land Management, we're all here to serve you, here to help answer your questions.
Thanks, Jessica. We have 3 minutes remaining. Claire, I see your hand is up. Do you have a quick question or comment?
Yeah, I was trying to remember just on the examples. I think it was a MnDOT presentation at maybe I can't recall what conference it was last year, but on a MnDOT highway in St. Paul that had a lot of collaboration. I just remember it starting as a roadway project, and then the community really spoke up that they wanted more than that. So I'm not sure if that would be an example that would fit the bill here for that question. But that was just coming to mind as something that was really incredible that y'all did. Yeah, potentially Arcade Street. I think so.
There's so many different programs that support these objectives at MnDOT, and so we can help folks navigate through that. The Community Roadside Landscape Partnership Program could be one avenue there, but sometimes how we leverage those private partners to ensure that maintenance occurs is really a key component. But I think there's many different types of programs that we have. So we literally have a dozen different programs that serve those type of objectives. But looks like Renee has another point as well.
Yeah, I just have one question actually, and I'm working a little bit more in the West area and kind of more closer to projects where some of these topics come up, and I wonder what would be like the next step you take when a community is interested in getting in some sort of art, like we're working on the Ped Bridge for Augsburg 22nd. They wanted to do some different things, but it's, of course, our project is really delivering that the bridge, right? And the design of that. And I shared the art policy, but then haven't looped around. And I feel like I kind of left them kind of hanging in the sense of like, what should we do for next steps to kind of generate those? I don't know, like who takes the lead? How does that happen? I feel like it's like a logistic thing where I see that there's like a desire, and then I just didn't know where to go from there.
Since we're at time, I would defer folks to, in Metro District, especially Lisa Austin, who could help navigate some of those policies and help. But both on a statewide level, myself and Lisa and Metro, we're happy to help support and activate arts organizations, potential funders, potential partners to help support that with a little bit of capacity or ideas. And so I think that there are, I would say more broadly, we could help connect you with those that would help Sherpa it along or provide more resources. So I think there's a few.
And I'll just jump into, I know we're at time, and I just echo what Jessica's saying. It's like, it really, there's different champions in different areas. Like I can say every single project I have has had a different unique funding source, a different way of getting there, a different champion. So yeah, we can, you know, might be it's interesting to have another one of these where we have some specific case studies that says like, okay, in this city, this is how it happened. In this county, that's how it happened. In this, you know, area, this is how it happened. Because there's not any one way. And Renee, on that one project, set up a meeting and we'll chat. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, Lisa, Renee, Izzy, for sharing your contact information, for being resources for further questions and continuing this dialogue. This was a great session today. I'm so appreciative for these exciting research updates from both you, Jessica, and Izzy. For everyone on the call, we will be sending out a link to the webinar recording, links to these specific projects, and then a link to next month's Research Radar, which is on all things environment and animals, dare I say, turtles, bats, and deer. Oh my, ooh, that was really cheesy. But lots of exciting environmental related projects. So if that's something of interest to you or somebody in your network, feel free to forward on that event. As always, it is free, but we do request that registration. So thank you for joining today, and stay tuned in your email for that follow-up with resources. Thank you all.
Thanks for having us. Thank you. Have a great day.